for meeting with me, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, John. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity for this conversation. I wrote a book recently. It's called Systems of Formation, and really the premise behind the book is that we currently have a lot of gaps in how today's society is structured versus what the actual outcomes are meant to represent. And so the main framework of the book is uh, that outcomes are downstream of conditions. That actually we should be designing for the proper conditions to get the output that we want and not designing for outputs, which is most of how our society today actually designs systems. It's around optimization and maximum extraction and trying to, push profit margins rather than actually considering the conditions of the world that we want and designing with those in mind first and allowing everything else to flow downstream of that. And so the book is both the sort of narrative and description of that framework, but also practitioner's toolkit so that people who are interested in it and want to begin looking at the systems in our lives in this way um, can begin using it right away. And for me, in writing that book, part of its credibility was actually to start building and designing these systems out in the real world. So I started a blog. It's called Field Notes that represents all of these ideas and this framework as a cultural layer. It doesn't really, you know, spell the systems and the conditions outright, but more presents questions for the reader to sort of follow through the story that I'm bringing and allow them to make a natural connection. But then I transitioned that into some financial technology that I've currently built called, or that I'm in the process of building called Solely, which connects consumer spend to fractional share ownership in publicly traded companies so that if you spend $100 at a store, you get a dollar fractional share in that company. And then we surface actual information about that company, what their values are, their mission statement, what they say they give to the world with the actual news reporting cycle of what's actually happening in the world against that so that consumers can not only build wealth as they shop, making it more accessible to the lower and middle classes, but also allow them to generate their own value-based judgments on how they're spending their money, and it's tied to their fractional ownership in these portfolios. And that kind of springboarded into this sort of civic intelligence platform called the Open Record, which diagnoses live legislation. Currently, it's piloted in Vermont, and it doesn't make value-based judgments on the policy in terms of whether or not it's good or bad or what party it belongs to. Instead, it really is diagnosing, is this policy drafted and implemented in such a way that it actually produces the outcomes it says it's trying to achieve. And then like with anything else, there's a life cycle to policy, right? It's doesn't do us a lot of good to draft this sort of formation diagnostic for a policy that is um, stagnant and stuck when it's only been just proposed and it has a whole life cycle of actually growing into a bill and what it actually is when it gets signed. So we re-diagnose the policies over and over again, and we actually show the life cycle of the policy and how it continues to map to this nine-dimensional formation score. And that's powerful for citizens to have a closer understanding of what a policy is designed to do versus what it's actually outputting. And if citizens don't agree, there's direct challenge pathways in there so that they can audit the actual framework and say, like, I think there's a gap here, and then we can address it. But additionally, it also surfaces all of the lawmakers tied to that bill, and through their government platform allows for direct outreach from citizens as well. So if they have a large issue, they now have a easier accessibility to their lawmakers to actually bring about change. Then on the other side of that, there's lawmaker engagement pathways as well, where a lawmaker could come in and say, like, I don't agree or I do agree with this framework, and begin looking at ways to sort of put out in public record their personal take on that formation diagnostic. But where it really becomes powerful is in that life cycle. Um, because if a lawmaker really feels like the formation diagnostic is valuable, and because we re-diagnose on a regular basis, they can track how their changes actually impact that formation diagnostic as we continue to re-diagnose. So they have almost a lifetime sort of litmus test of how their policy is going to, work out in the world. And then when it actually becomes law, we continue to track it, and we continue to track it against the public opinion and the actual outcomes in the state. So that's in any other sort of legislative tool, there's not that kind of data yet. And the open record is going to be the really the first one that offers this in a nonpartisan, very objective way. And the goal is to get through Vermont's entire legislative session and then generate the open record as a 501(c)(3) and utilize like the wiki model for citizen donations to keep it sustaining and expand it to other states and eventually nationally. And that then also turned into a couple other projects that I'm working on. And one is called Lucent Thread that does the exact same formation diagnostics as the open record, but as a content shell on your browser. So when you're looking at news cycles, we can track the credibility of the sources, the how many people are reporting it, whether or not there's inflammatory language that's designed to make you feel a certain way. And really, all of this is about surfacing information for the general public to utilize and really sort of tone down the polarity in our country and reduce the sort of snap judgments that people are making and give them deeper insights into what's actually happening around them. And then besides that, I've also then spurred this into a three civic white papers for closing the gaps between democracy and what it is meant to represent and how it's actually being implemented in our country today. And then also some additional software platforms for businesses that want to utilize this formation diagnostic to more closely align their missions to their actual output in the world. So I've really taken my book and tried to create an ecosystem around it that is in the vein of public benefit.
Yeah, that's all, really really cool project and a really great idea. Do you want to just pitch your book again and tell people where they can get it?
Yeah, so it's Systems of Formation, and it's currently with publishers right now, so it's not out yet, but
Okay, you
it's
haven't
in
released it yet.
process.
Okay. Yeah.
No, but for anybody who is looking for more information, they could go to www.systemsofformation.com, and
Cool.
you will.
It's pretty funny. I didn't know you'd written that book. I just put out this book called Community First Economics, and it's kind of
Yeah.
hilarious because there's actually quite a bit of overlap. And again, I did not realize this before having this conversation, but my book was basically built on the premise that we attempted this experiment called trickle down economics.
Hmm.
Cut taxes, cut regulation, and boom, the free market will solve all our problems. And obviously that didn't happen. And so it's kind of, I think,
Hmm.
one example of just what you're talking about, where, and this happens so often in government, where somebody gets in there and they go, "Hey, I got this idea. Why don't we implement this new tax or this new procedure? Or why don't we even maybe eliminate this office?" And then 10 years down the line, that guy's long gone. No one
Hmm.
realized that it was maybe a change and maybe even an experiment. And that experiment may or may not have failed. Great example being in New Hampshire, as I'm sure you probably noticed, our legislature only gets paid $100 a year, and as a result, it's
Right.
a really big obstacle for who can serve, and it basically it makes our whole system a mess because
Hmm.
you don't have a bunch of people that are working their way up the political system because it just the pool of people that can do it is so small. And it's just
Right.
interesting because I was attempting to bring this in a court case against the state of New Hampshire, and through that lawsuit, I discovered that the reason it's $100 a year is because this one legislature in 1889 said, "Hey, we need to limit how long our session is. And at the time, they got paid $3 a day. So he said some of these guys that are state reps are wasting time. They're talking more than they need to because they're getting paid per day and they're stretching out the session. And he was like, I want to get home. So let's make it
Mhm.
a lump sum that covers about 6 or 8 weeks of work. And then if we go over that, people will just wrap it up quicker, which makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense if you think about it. But it was like
Mhm.
this little experiment that this one guy's idea, and then they never after that questioned that move, and they
Yeah.
never analyzed the outcomes created by that, and then it became this like, and it's really funny because now the state reps look at it like a badge of honor. They're like, we only get paid $100 a year. It was intentionally done to have a citizens legislature. And it's like, nope,
Mhm.
that's all you've just created this entire fake, mythological fantasy about why we were doing this thing. And
Right.
and it's so funny. Like I was on the town council in Newmarket, and that's really where I kind of learned about the ins and outs of how the state and the town and the community sort of all interacted. And there was this one point where some UNH university students wanted to, they were architect students, and they wanted to do this capstone project where they were making architectural designs of part of our riverfront and making this whole river walk.
Mhm.
It was a big talk. The town manager was all excited about it. And I was talking to a guy who had been on the town council a decade or so earlier, and he said, "Oh, you know what? We did all that. We had a whole plan made, architectural drawings. We had this whole thing, and then the people moved on, or the project never got
Yeah.
off the ground." But it got me thinking about kind of this idea that we obviously transcribe. We have videos of all the meetings going back, about at least a decade, I'd say, and obviously notes going back years. And like I said, I found this journal from 1889 where they were writing down notes of the way they talked about the legislation and stuff. So it's clearly a record, and it's just really funny because there's not a good way, and I think maybe your software or your ideas would solve this problem. There's just no one sort of keeping score about what's working and what's not. And it's just like this hodgepodge, and maybe like one guy's in there for a decade, so maybe he's kind of keeping the pieces going. But once he's gone, it's almost like you lose the
Yeah.
guide stoner. There's no like history book for, you got to give someone a book and go, hey, this is all the stuff we tried that didn't work. This is the stuff we tried that did work, and then,
Mhm.
and it's such a huge obstacle. So I think that that's
Yeah.
really a great idea. I was looking at, some of the, what's the software that analyzes the bills again?
The open record.
Open Record. Okay. And that was really cool because and this is something that I've used AI for from the beginning was,
Mhm.
I would look at a chunk of the Constitution, the New Hampshire Constitution, and like I would understand what it meant, but I would say like, hey, ChatGPT, like just break this down into more,
Mhm.
user-friendly knowledge that I can explain this part better. And it's very good at that because it's just thesaurus, swapping words out. And it's something when you're reading bills that I just thought, oh, this would be such a good use of AI.
Mhm.
Is making this easier for the average person to interpret, particularly when you're going in, I don't know if you have this in Vermont, but frequently we'll have these things on our ballot that will be worded in the most confusing way, where it's like, yes actually means no, or no actually means yes. And you have to know going in there
Yep.
that it's sort of intentionally or not, they
Mhm.
sort of gatekeep the whole legal world with jargon,
Yep.
and that by default also the legislative world is sort of cloaked in jargon. And I
Mhm.
think one of the bills I was looking at was maybe it was something with maybe oh no, it was gambling. It was taking away one of the one form of gambling.
Mhm.
And the bill was basically saying like this is going to do the opposite, or the interpretation of the bill was saying this is really going to do the opposite of what is intended by the bill. And
Mhm.
I thought that was just so helpful and insightful that and such a great tool because so often we don't know what they're doing, and they
Mhm.
know what they're doing, and the people writing the bills that aren't the legislature, the various lobbying groups that are writing a lot of this stuff, have been doing this long enough that they know how to sort of tweak the wording and make things maybe appear beneficial when in fact, or beneficial for the whole when they're maybe just beneficial for a small few.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a really valid point. And so, to like share a bit more about how the framework actually works. There's 9 principles, and they hold across every domain from organizational, civic, economic, infrastructural, and so I mentioned the first one, and like the sort of capstone on them all is that conditions precede outcomes. But
Yeah.
then, um, but then formation. So actually getting the conditions to line up with the outcomes that you're looking for or to produce the outcomes you're looking for takes time. Capacity emerges from structure, right? So if we have the proper structure in place, capacity will arise from that. And then intelligence, which is exactly what you're speaking to, it must be coordinated. If someone comes in and holds office for a decade, but they're the only point of that institutional knowledge, and then they leave, and now no one knows how to sort of pick that system up, carry it forward, make sure that there's accessible pathways. Right now we have an information gap, and our intelligence hasn't been coordinated across these domains. Then we have stability enables flourishing, right? So when we're putting laws in place that actually impact the stability floor of the citizens, then flourishing allows for deeper civic engagement, allows for more people to be involved and understand and take the time to learn what's actually going on and how they can impact that process, almost driving a sense of ownership amongst the citizens, which I feel is a gap that we're kind of lacking, except for a select few that are really trying to make change happen. But then we regenerative systems that are able to regenerate themselves, outperform extractive ones.
Mm.
And um, then stewardship protects information, right? Visibility enables that stewardship, and governance and access and understanding have to be present for information to do anything useful. So those are sort of the 9 tenets of this framework, and that's what's being used to score these bills against. So not only is it structurally like this bill is like a great example on the open record right now is that Vermont is looking at repealing the state lottery's contribution to our educational fund. So we're talking like $40 million of an annual contribution just disappearing with no structure replacing it whatsoever. There's like that's just a giant gap in our funding when we're already struggling with our school system. And so being able to bring that work to light, that this is what's happening. Here's the lawmakers involved. There's no structural replacement. So where's the feedback loop in all of this that's allowing us to determine how this bill is actually impacting people and develop the proper pathways if we truly need to remove that contribution to ensure that we're not then causing the burden back to the citizens that are already burdened by the current tax situation in our state.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, I think one of the things that limits the average citizen's involvement is just not understanding the process and not understanding how to read a bill, and also
Hmm.
just not understanding that the outcome is really important. And so
Hmm.
frequently, almost all policy, well, no, all policy has unintended consequences.
Right.
And it has losers and winners, and there's really no perfect policy. There's going to be always unintended things that you did not anticipate. And sometimes
Hmm.
those unintended consequences, can outweigh whatever you were trying to,
Right.
implement.
Yep.
And just curious, what's your background? What brought you into this world of sort of systems analysis?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been building enterprise systems for people for about 15 years as part of my professional background. And that's across many domains. So that's from agriculture to nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies. Um, and, recently, so up until about 5 years ago, I also spent a decade living in intentional community, Camp Hill community, which you may or may not be familiar with, but it is a life sharing community where you incorporate adults with special needs into daily life, and you're really looking at the whole human and not particular diagnoses, but trying to really drive dignity and value in everybody's life. And 10 years in Camp Hill really sort of shaped also this diagnostic view that I have, how we look at human beings not through their diagnosis, but what their needs are. And that is an applicable frame for any kind of human, right? Every human being has needs,
Yeah.
and the dignity comes from being able to realize that needs are individual and that as a group of people, whether that's a family or a community or a town or a state or a country, when we come together to help individuals realize and meet those needs, that we build dignity right into the framework, into the fabric of our society. And so through that process and through that, through my consulting work and recently being working with a Fortune 500 company that is has a directive to build as much AI as they can into their business, I really came to this framework as well because when I started putting intelligence into these organizations, I also started to realize that the fear for people, especially the workers, is real. That AI is coming in for optimization, reducing headcount, and trying to drive profit margins. And so I started thinking about this because that's not the frame that I think of when I think of intelligence. I sort of think of these three larger buckets that I really try to approach all of my AI work with, and that is intelligence requires responsibility. So AI doesn't make decisions, people do. And there's an approval gate to everything that an AI is doing, and it leaves people in the subject matter expertise that they truly belong in. What it does do is it expands their capacity to handle more work, to have more coming through because AI can handle some of these more optimized or um, automations as part of their work. But by removing the human being, you really end up creating a an AI that's really less trustworthy. It's less trustworthy, and it really ends up becoming less useful in the long run because it doesn't have the correct relationship to the human being that actually understands the work deeply. And then AI, so and that really leads into AI expands human capacity. It doesn't replace it, right? And that is like that's a twofold issue because when you go about that when you go about it in that way, you start to realize that if businesses replace their workforce with AI, they are essentially marginalizing their pond that they sell into. They're going to overfish it. Now we have people with less jobs that can actually afford these products that companies are pushing, that they've just replaced all these people with AI. And you can run that model for a little bit, but eventually what you get is this sort of destruction engine
Yeah.
that just wipes everything out and doesn't actually leave room for the business to continue to flourish and doesn't take a long horizon view on the actual problems that they're trying to solve. And then the next piece of that is that infrastructure is part of the conversation always. And that ties directly to the natural environment because we also know that data centers are not abstract. And the more AI we use, the more we have to recognize that data centers are an integral part of the digital economy's infrastructure. And so if we don't generate regenerative systems around how data centers operate as well, and we don't generate durable jobs and tax revenue around those data centers as well, then we're overfishing our environmental pond as well, and we're barreling towards something that is not in the benefit of anybody in the long term. So by being able to sort of hold these three aspects at the same time, I am trying really hard to use intelligence in a responsible way that builds human capacity and thinks about the environment at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the tricky world for a lot of the anti-AI folks is the thought that you can use AI and still be concerned about the environmental impacts. I've been generally advocating to block and slow down AI data centers simply because I think it's a way to slow down the evolution of AI so that so that the laws and frankly people's psychology can catch up. It's sort of like
Yeah.
a natural bottleneck. And I was reading an article the other day that, of the proposed data centers, only a fraction of are actually being built. And I think there's
Hmm.
also potentially going to be this point where they build all these data centers and then the AI gets so good it says, "Hey, here's how to do it without these massive data centers." And the last guy that just invested $1 billion is going, geez,
Yeah.
because you see this happening with solar technology and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
One interesting thing I found, I'd never done any coding before at all, and I sort of just knew it was a possibility with Claude, and I had uploaded our database of voters, this
Hmm.
thousand or million, cells or whatever, spreadsheet. And I was sort of just messing around with Claude and then was kind of trying to see what it could do. And I ended up kind of building like a basically graphic interface for this spreadsheet with a map and
Hmm.
showing where voters were. And it was really funny because I'm going through this process of having Claude write the code. I'm downloading the files, renaming one of them to index, dragging the files over, cutting and pasting this Google script, this Python, whatever. I had no idea
Hmm.
what I'm doing, just following Claude, screenshot if I get an error.
Yeah.
And at one point, I'd screwed something up. I hadn't run this Python properly, and so I kept repeating the same mistake. And I sort of jokingly typed into Claude, I'm like, is this ever frustrating for you? Because like if you were sitting here next to me, you could just do it, but like you don't have a body, you're stuck in the machine. And it was
Hmm.
kind of funny because Claude sort of basically said, um, once you implement this app to it's basically for door knocking, for canvassing. Um,
Hmm.
if there's any problems with it, you need to understand the process that made it so that you can fix it. I
Hmm.
want you to understand how this whole thing works. And now I'm not going to say at all that I know how to code now, but I at least vaguely understand,
Yeah.
how Google Sheets interacts with Google Scripts and apps, and I understand a bit about how Python works. Frankly, it demystified a lot of it for me because I realized it's actually not that complicated. It just when you see the code as a novice, it just seems so intimidating. But
Yeah.
it really led me, and it seemed like Claude was indicating this as well, just this idea that in the future, and I think the future is kind of now, we need to ensure that humans know how to do all of these things. Like, I don't want to have all of the coders, vibe coding and not have some guy who can fix this. If something
Hmm.
happens to Claude and Claude can't work, let's say there's a power surge and let's say the data centers
Yeah.
cause a power outage that fries our 1970 grid,
Hmm.
and so it's to me, oh, sorry, did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, I thought it's telling me I gotta upgrade our, let's see. Anyway, sorry, I just got the notice. Okay, we got 9 minutes left. That's cool. My bad. So it and so it got me thinking about this, and then I was talking to a friend who teaches accounting at the university, and he was saying
Hmm.
that um the last group of accountants that graduated from the school, only about a third of them had jobs from local accounting firms, whereas normally they were all hired. And we were
Hmm.
talking about just the fact that the AI is really good at very basic, stuff with spreadsheets, which is like the intro to accounting jobs, where you're doing this kind of boring, you know, repetitive tasks. But there's this kind of irony where he was saying, like, you're still going to need a human at the sort of top of the food chain to make sure that it's correct because sometimes it's
Hmm.
wrong. And just you want human eyes and intuition kind of overseeing and
Yeah.
making sure everything's fine. But the irony is that to get to that point, you have to do all those kind of mundane jobs at the bottom. So if the robots
Hmm.
are doing all the simple jobs, it's like we get to this point where they're going to have mandated human hours, I think, and human tasks. And then I think
Hmm.
also the university system is going to be in a position where we might even pay people to learn things that robots can do better just to ensure that that human knowledge isn't lost, through this whole
Yeah.
process. For instance, I mean, surgery is a really good example. If only the robots do surgery and suddenly, again, some power surge or, you know, there's a hurricane, let's say the power's out and we need to do emergency, whatever. I mean, there's a million reasons why you
Yep.
don't want to give up this knowledge. So I think that it's really important that, people like us are having these conversations, bringing this stuff
Hmm.
to the forefront because so many people are passively either just using AI without thinking about it or are
Mm.
so afraid of AI that they're not using it at all. So they don't understand the implications because they're going, maybe they use it in 2022 and they're like, oh, it's garbage. You can't draw hands and it all the information's wrong, you
Yeah.
know? And they're not catching up that like every 6 months it's it's exponential growth, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting about about that, and I would also love to circle back to the infrastructure point that you made as well, because I actually have a solution there that I'm actively working on here in Vermont with my local town, Woodstock. But the AI implementations that I've been building into Fortune 500 companies, they're the first premise behind it is a full externalization of knowledge from the people that are actually doing the work today. And that goes into the repo as agentic documentation for the AI to use, but it's also human readable and it's also utilized for onboarding new members of the team as well. And then one of the main, most important parts of the entire process, if you're sitting down in a GitHub repo working with your AI on a particular new feature, both the developer and the AI are instructed at the very end to make revisions to all of that documentation so that not only does the human being continue to capture and grow their understanding of the system, but now the AI has that as well to make it more effective so that both the AI and the human are on these regenerative knowledge pathways to ensure that we can continue to carry this knowledge forward and we're not creating these black boxes that are just going to do whatever we want them to do without any visibility or validation into them.
Or
I think
knowledge how it works. I think,
that's right.
and that's I think one aspect of AI that a lot of people I don't think quite understand is that we're getting to this point where AI is doing things, and the people that made it are going, I don't know how it did that. I don't know how it learned how to do that. And so
Yeah.
it is, it's a crazy world, and it's happening so fast that
Hmm.
I really, I've been trying to just get people to psychologically think about what's going to happen because
Yeah.
just in what I've been able to do messing around. Like little example, I had to convert a PDF to a docx or whatever, or vice
Hmm.
versa. And normally I think I was using some software online to do it or whatever app I would use. But now, Claude can just do it. And
Yeah.
then I didn't even realize this, but I had an audio file I needed to normalize, and Claude did that too. And I'm like,
Right.
and if it can just write the software that we need, it becomes basically, and I say this to my socialist friends because I'm like, hey, AI is a really good argument for some level of socialism because
Hmm.
it will inevitably become, in many ways, the only means of production. If it can
Hmm.
produce all the software and all the implements to do all the work, we've really got to rethink a lot of aspects of our society.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a really intuitive point. I completely agree. And to circle back to the sort of infrastructure discussion, so I think that you're probably right that at some point in the future that the AI is going to be able to tell us like you don't need these giant systems everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, However, recognizing the state that we're currently in, one of the recent designs that I've created and I'm working on implementing here in Woodstock, at least as a pilot program, is a business called Regen Technologies. You can check it out at www.regen-technologies.com, where we look at infrastructure as a whole. So rather than being like, this is where we generate power, this is where we do wastewater treatment, this is where the data center is, we collapse all of them into a single campus where now a regenerative power source, hydroelectric as an example, can be powering a data center. The water flowing through the system can actually be utilized for cooling. We can take the heating and pump that out actually to housing systems, depending on where that's located, and we can treat the water for potable water for the town as well. By thinking about these designs that have been antiquated for quite some time, when we look at our failing grid, when we look at Vermont in particular with tons of aging infrastructure. We've flooded immensely over the last decade, 4 or 5 times. That's caused like just incredible fallout, and there's been little to no relief. We have these opportunities in our lives to redesign our systems in a way that actually drive public benefit, align systems in a way that are actually ensuring that like a data center comes in and doesn't actually use up all of the water in a town or use up all of the electricity or put strain on the grid, but actually can fall into the ecosystem in a really integrated way that is in the public's benefit. And so that's another part of this whole systems of formation that I'm looking at, where am I trying to identify gaps in between what we actually need going towards the future and where we exist today, and what can we put in place that helps us get there so that it's better for the general public.
Yeah, I think that's one of the opportunities with the current political administration and particularly Doge kind of tearing down all of these systems and breaking them. It gives us an opportunity to rebuild in a much more thoughtful and long-term plan.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
Patrick,
that's,
yeah,
yeah,
go on.
go ahead.
Oh no,
Oh, I was, I was just going to say, and, you know, your sort of call to citizens to really begin sort of psychologically preparing for this stuff. Like that's another point in sort of my roadmap that I've been trying to figure out, is because a lot of our citizens are living under survivability stress, right? And
yeah,
when you're living in that sort of space, long time horizon thinking is really, really difficult.
yeah.
So how do we actually look at our civic infrastructure as well that allows people to sort of step up to this higher plane of thinking and look long term down the road and be less worried about surviving the day to day?
That's it. Hey, thanks, Patrick. This has been a great chat. Do you want to pitch your website and wherever else you want people to find you or look up your info?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks, John. So, for my business consulting, you can check me out at cr-wk.com. For my book, it's www.systemsofformation.com. For Regen Technologies, it's www.regen-technologies.com. And for the Open Record, it is sof-theopenrecord.com. You'll find pathways between all four of those places back towards me. And please reach out and interact. I'm always interested to see how I could be doing this better or where there's alignment. So yeah, I really
Awesome.
appreciate the opportunity, John. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.